Hey, Slater Crusaders, America's the greatest country in the world. Thanks for being here. Be on the lookout for the next phase of shaming the unvaccinated. And once we hit this next phase, there's no going back. Let's just review where we are so far before I tell you what the next phase is. So far, the unvaxxed can't participate in polite society. You can't go anywhere, do anything. The unvaccinated can't be trusted. The unvaccinated don't even deserve medical care. The next phase of this, because this is how it's always worked in all of history, is that the unvaccinated are dirty. They are dirty, disgusting, filthy, untouchable, and unclean. Be on the lookout for people on the left, media, etc., using the words or any synonym around dirty. And once that happens, all bets are off. I want to quote Jesse Kelly here, our very own. He tweeted the other day, he said, "History doesn't lie. History is the study of human nature. And creating different classes of people in a society is step one. And then step two is always deciding how the lower class, the dirty class, should be punished for their status. Step one leads to step two every time. And it's amazing that people can't see this, okay? So let's roll through these. I'll back up everything I just said so far. This is Mayor de Blasio with New York City's new vaccine passport.
So today I announce a new approach, which we're calling the Key to NYC Pass. The key to New York City. When you hear those words, I want you to imagine the notion that because someone's vaccinated, they can do all the amazing things that are available in this city. This is a miraculous place, literally full of wonders. And if you're vaccinated, all that's going to open up to you. You'll have the key, you can open the door. But if you're unvaccinated, unfortunately, you will not be able to participate in many things. That's the point we're trying to get across. It's time for people to see vaccination as literally necessary to living a good and full and healthy life.
Isn't that amazing? By the way, great side panel here, guys, the Unclean. You're a citizen, but you don't have the keys to the city. You won't be able to participate in many things. He literally said, like, it's necessary. He said literally necessary to live a good, full life. And the vaccine passport is just starting in New York City. Will never go away. There will never not be a vaccine passport now. Right? They'll change the name of it moving forward, right? There's no expiration to it. There's no date expiration. He didn't say, oh, we're going to do this for a year. There's no COVID-related metric for when this goes away, like, oh, when the death rate is below a certain or case rate. But no, it's here forever. Is there any protection there to make sure that no other standard gets put into the keys to the city, right? Or maybe you need to have other vaccines, or I don't even know. Like, I'll leave it to the left. They'll come up with stuff. Maybe you have to prove that you voted in the last election or something. Or maybe they'll put your race on this vaccine passport, and maybe only certain people of certain preferred classes can eat or go to shows at certain days or whatever. It just depends whatever the people who control the passports will allow. It will never go away, right? It'll be like the TSA. You still take your shoes off at the airport, all right? It'll never go away, and it will not end with COVID vaccinations. I promise you that. The Atlantic magazine, the original headline was "Unvaccinated people belong on the no-fly list." They since changed the headline, but the point still remains, like you're some sort of terrorist. So you don't have the keys to the city. You can't be involved in polite society. You can't go places because you're unclean. And now you're a terrorist. You and the 9/11 guys aren't allowed on a right. Here's Margaret Hoover, who's like a conservative sort of. If you're going to get government-provided health care, if you're getting VA treatment, Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security, you should be getting the vaccine, okay? Because you're going to have to, we're going to have to take care of you on the back end. I'm hearing more and more people saying that if you're not vaccinated, then you don't deserve medical treatment, which I've never heard ever I've never heard anything like that ever in my entire life. Could you imagine if I or anyone said people with AIDS don't deserve medical treatment? I mean, it's your fault, right? It's your fault you got it. So should the rest of us really be responsible? Or people who get a heart attack they don't deserve medical treatment. I mean, listen, man, you shouldn't have had that Twinkie, you know what I'm saying? People with lung cancer don't deserve treatment. Gunshot victims who are gang members, right? Imagine you're a nurse or a doctor and a gunshot victim comes in and you're like, hey, are you in a gang? Yeah, I'm in a gang. Ah, sorry, you asked for it. Or people who attempt suicide. All right, well, we're not going to give them any treatment. They wanted to die anyway. Isn't that insane? Like that is such a sign of a sick society. This is a huge problem and no one's paying attention to this one. Like we used to pride ourselves on being people who would take care of anyone. Do you remember there was Pittsburgh? There was that synagogue shooting in Pittsburgh, and the shooter went in, killed Jews in the synagogue, right? And he got shot, and then was brought to the local hospital, and the doctors treated him, and the doctors were Jewish. And we would celebrate. They were like, oh, that's unbelievable, the compassion that you have even in this moment. Oh, it's so admirable. It's an amazing story. And now here we are, and we're like, oh, you're not vaccinated? You deserve to die. Come on, people. That's a huge problem. You cannot live in a society that talks like that. Then there's this. So what have we done so far? We've done the keys to the city. You can't be in polite society. You're on a no-fly list like you're a terrorist. You don't deserve medical treatment. This is this new CNN doctor. She's the former head of Planned Parenthood, so she's an absolute ghoul. She was also the former head of the Baltimore Health Department, and here she is.
Vaccinated and unvaccinated people are mixing unless there is proof of vaccination. Everybody should still be wearing masks. And so I actually support what the CDC is now doing, which is going back to this indoor mask requirement, because frankly, we know that we can't trust the unvaccinated, that they have been walking around without masks. And in fact, that's what led to the surge that.
That smile, right? We can't trust them. Did you catch that? We can't trust them. Who's them? Those people. We just can't trust them. That group over there, they don't deserve health care. They don't deserve treatment. They can't go places. We can't let them go places. And you just can't trust them. You can't trust those terrorists. This is all very problematic language. Are you with me? So what's next? The next line is the point of no return. Right? Once it gets to this point and it's the next point, then there's no going back. And it's just declaring that other class is dirty. Unvaccinated people are gross. They're disgusting, unclean, an untouchable class of people, a disgusting group of people. So what's next? I want to play these clips here. I got 3 clips of Jordan Peterson from his lectures in college back in 2017. Here's clip 1.
And one of the things we've discovered that's really interesting is that disgust sensitivity is associated with orderliness, and that's associated with conscientiousness. And one of the things about Hitler was that he was very disgust sensitive, and a lot of his hatred for non-Aryans. So imagine inside the Aryan box it was all uniform, outside it was all parasites and predators. And that was a manifestation of disgust, not of fear. It's a whole different thing. And if you read Hitler's Table Talk, which is a collection of his spontaneous dinner speeches from 1939 to 1942, it's a very interesting book. You see that his metaphor for the Aryan race was a body, a pure body, unassaulted by parasites or predators, and that he was trying to erect a border around it to keep all of that away. So it's an immunological disgust-like metaphor. And there's some recent work that was published in PLOS One about 3 years ago showing that, a brilliant study, should have got much more attention, showing that if you went around and sampled political attitudes in different countries, or even within the same country, what you found was that the higher the prevalence of infectious diseases, the higher the probability of totalitarian political attitudes at the local level. And you can imagine, well, what happens if there's infectious diseases is you want to put borders around everything. You don't want free movement between ideas or people, because that's partly how the disease spreads.
That's so good. That study there, I gotta do more research on that study, but the idea is that countries with more infectious disease have more totalitarian policies because we need to control the diseased people. So we need to physically put them in a box, right? We gotta wall them off, but we also have to socially wall them off. We need to wall off even their ideas, because their ideas are dripping with the disease that they physically have. This is like the Fauci of Nova Scotia. We played this clip 100 times. The Fauci of Nova Scotia was asked why they're still banning gatherings. And he said, well, because the disease is still spreading, and also gatherings are where they spread misinformation. As if the things they're saying are diseased as well. They are filthy, and so are their ideas, which leads to more totalitarianism and more taking away of your freedom. Be on the lookout for the word dirty, the disgust sensitivity. It's going to be used moving forward here. It's just part of the process. More Jordan Peterson here.
And before Hitler went on his rampage against the non-Aryans, he cleaned up all the factories. Like, he went in there and fumigated them. It was part of the law. And he went on a public health campaign to get rid of tuberculosis, and he got rid of the bugs in the factories as well. And he used Zyklon B. That's an insecticide, and that's the gas that he used in the gas chambers eventually. So first it was the bugs in the rats, and then it was people who were, then it was euthanasia. That was the next move, and forced euthanasia. And the rationale for that was compassion, by the way, just so you all know. It's merciful to put these people who are burdensome to themselves and their families and the state, who are living second-rate lives. It's merciful to euthanize them. And that was a huge campaign in Germany. It was after that that the more racial purifications began. And so that's the disgust thing. That's unbelievably important.
And that's where we are right now. That's what's next, is the disgust aspect of it. But I love that it's all done for your own good. Be on the lookout for that too. It's done for, well, listen, we're going to wall those people off for our own good, obviously, right? We're gonna wall off the dirty underclass for our own good. But also, we're gonna do that out of compassion for them. It's for their own good that we need to not treat the unvaccinated people who get COVID. It's for their own good, because they need to be taught a lesson. They need to be taught a lesson about how important this is. So it's for their own good that we're taking away their rights and their liberties and their freedoms. Be careful for that spin too. Last point from Peterson here, because you wonder, and I know, I always know there's some eye rolling, and it's fine. Because you say, Slater, this will never happen here. Things like this will never happen here. We're way too civilized. We're way more advanced than people were back in the day. What if the fact that we are civilized is what will lead us down that path? Last clip.
It's really terrifying, because one of the things people often said about Germany was that, you know, it was a very civilized country, and yet it descended into barbarity. But conscientiousness is a very good predictor of long-term success. And so you could say, well, conscientious societies are more civilized, but they're also more orderly, and that makes them more disgust sensitive. And so what it might have easily been in Germany was that it was an excess of civilization rather than its lack that produced exactly these consequences. And that's a far more frightening proposition, and one that's, I believe, much more likely to be true. Hitler bathed 4 times a day.
I just want to put that last part in there too. That is, that's terrifying and totally flips it on. Like, I always would rely back on, well, it won't happen here because we know better, or we're more civilized than that. No, it's because we're so civilized. It increases the likelihood that that will happen, because if you're a conscientious people, conscientious means you do what you're supposed to do thoroughly and well and completely, right? Like you do your work, right? So we're civilized people, we're conscientious people, which means we're more orderly. Orderly means we're more disgust sensitive, which means we need to eradicate the dirty. And that's where we are now. These unvaccinated people, they can't be trusted. They're to blame for the virus mutating. Actually, the fact that they're not vaccinated, the virus is spreading and mutating, and then that's putting us more at risk. So really, those people, they're attacking us. So now everything we do to separate them, it's justified and also compassionate. Once that rhetoric hits this point, which we're very close to, what day is it? Wednesday? So probably by Friday. Once we get to the unclean, and there's no going back. Slater Crusaders, please download our app in the App Store. It's totally free. It's super easy interface. That's my favorite thing about it. It's just, there's no nonsense. There's no, right? You just click it. It opens, tons of videos, easy to scroll through, easy to find your favorite host, as you all just saw right there. Click the picture, boom, it plays. And that's it. No mess. Piece of cake. Totally free in the App Store, Android, and your smartphone. Coming up next, I got a Thomas Sowell quote to kick it off. Can't go wrong with that, right? True story. Mike Slater. Spread the word. Later, Crusaders, you can't go wrong with a little Thomas Sowell. This is him on Charlie Rose back in the day. The one point of context is Milton Friedman, if you're not familiar, is a great free market economist, friends with Thomas Sowell, and Charlie Rose tries to throw that in his face here.
This has been a set of assumptions that's been very popular among intellectuals. What has happened in our time is that intellectuals have been taken much more seriously since the 60s than they were before. And I think we're suffering the consequences of it. It's not the first time in history that intellectuals have been taken seriously, and disasters have followed.
So we shouldn't have taken Milton Friedman seriously?
Milton Friedman is a very atypical intellectual.
You can't play this game and say, well, we shouldn't take intellectuals seriously, then accept those that I happen to think are right. We should take them seriously.
By seriously, I mean in the sense, I should have clarified this, in the sense that they are exempted from the test of facts. Did it work? When I hear people come on the air and say these lofty things, right, I say to myself, show me where we've ever gotten better off listening to people like this.
Right. All right.
I see these psychologists coming on and say how you should raise your children. I said, how are children better today now that we've been listening to these people for 30 years? Are they happier? Are they more learned? Test scores go down, venereal disease goes up, suicide rates go up. In what way are we better off for having listened to?
And now we're 50, 60 years into listening to these clowns. Stop listening to these people. This is a tweet from WebMD. Check this out. Sex, gender, should be removed as a legal designation on the public part of birth certificates, the American Medical Association says. The American Medical Association. Listen, I feel like a while ago, maybe the accusation was, oh, you're just finding some random crazy people on Twitter who are coming up with this. This is the American Medical Association. Doesn't think your gender should be on your birth certificate because kids should decide. Well, that's the point of that. Because we don't want the doctor to assign a gender. We should let the kids decide what gender they are when they get older. That's the American Medical Association. Are you with me? You got intellectuals to thank for that. So how about we stop listening to these people? Can we please? Look how they're screwing up our kids. This is the University of South Florida going around asking people if they're going to root for Team USA. The reference to this first question is that woman, I forget her name, the hammer throw woman who turned her back on the flag and isn't proud to be an American and blah, 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 blah. Here it is.
It's embarrassing that, our own athletes who are on Team USA aren't even proud to be an American, it seems like.
I don't think so, because I don't like being an American either, even though I'm born here. I think there is such corruption and a crumbling infrastructure. Like, why is there no free health care? Why are so many people suffering because of housing? And that is such a great example of how corrupt it is here.
Do you think athletes should be allowed to express their political beliefs? Will you be rooting for Team USA?
I'm going to be rooting for athletes individually. I'm not going to be rooting for any team just because it's some country that I live in, because the truth is patriotism shouldn't be that strong. I'm in this country because I was born in it, and because it gives me some opportunities. It doesn't mean that there aren't things to fix, so I'm not going to root on someone just because they come from the same place as me. I'm not proud to live in a country where I can't even go down my own neighborhood and see people putting up their Blue Lives Matter flags telling me that my life doesn't matter.
I root for particular athletes rather than the country as a whole.
If you were to ask me in the last administration, maybe not.
So now that Biden's in office, you'll root for Team USA.
Well, I guess when you say it like that.
Oh, that's such a good one at the end. I guess when you say it like that. How about that first girl? Crumbling, I'm just not proud to be an American because of all the crumbling infrastructure. Oh, lady. We're not a great country because of our crumbling infrastructure. The only time the word crumbling is ever used is when it's followed by infrastructure. And one of the only times that the word infrastructure is ever used is when it's preceded by crumbling, which is a sign that a person is brainwashed and doesn't think for themselves. Have you ever been driving down the street? Let's say there's a pothole on your street and you're driving down, you're like, more crumbling infrastructure. Like no one talks like that. No normal person in normal conversation ever uses the word crumbling infrastructure. The only reason you would ever use that is if you're totally brainwashed, as that girl clearly is. Share that video here to show how pervasive this American hatred is. A nation cannot survive when its youth despises everything it represents. End of story. So what you just saw right there is the fruit of the intellectuals, to go back to Thomas Sowell's point. That's the fruit. This is what we're dealing with. That's who the intellectuals have created. And by the way, I just saw this the other day. This is the best that our culture can do and try and put this all back together. This is a picture of a bookshelf in a Barnes & Noble bookstore. These are the millennial answers to our problems today. Just put the F word or S word on the front of a book, and people think that you got the right answers. Ridiculous. One quote here out of the New York Times. This is a book review. This is a book review of a book that was written about the fall of the Soviet Union. This is from a couple decades ago. And the book reviewer says, the book's good, but it missed a point or two about the collapse of the Soviet Union. One thing it missed is the role of ideology, or more specifically, the way in which it lost all meaning to the people who deserted Gorbachev in 89 to 91. Gorbachev was the last of the believers in the communist ideal, but his party comrades had long ceased to believe it. Their ideology had become little more than an empty slogan, a means of entry to the special shops reserved for the Soviet elite. So they didn't believe in communism anymore. They just had to say the party line so that they could go to the good hospitals, so that they could go to the good stores. This fact is essential if we're to understand why so few communists were prepared to fight for the Soviet regime. In other words, the Soviet Union collapsed quick because of widespread disillusionment. And that it's the people stopped believing in the principles that were the foundation of their country. They stopped believing it. So it collapsed. Disillusionment. That's what we have in America today, particularly with younger people. And the intellectuals are sowing it. And we're all going to reap it. All right, I'm going to do a quick little turn here before we get to our next guest and talk about Cuomo. Intellectuals are arrogant. We've talked about humility a lot the last couple shows. That's one of the problems with absolute power, is people think they know everything, right? We like to think we know everything because there's no God anymore. Of course there's no God. So we like to think we are all-knowing and all-powerful. I was at the beach the other day with my 4.5-year-old son, and he was standing right at the end of the wave. So the wave would come in, it would hit the sand, and then it would kind of like work up the beach. He was standing right at the end in the dry sand, holding his arms out, saying, "Stop!" to the waves. Literally, he said, "Stop!" And the waves would stop, and he would look up as if he stopped the wave. And then the next one would come in, it would crash over his legs. And he literally said, "Not just a couple days ago," he said, "I slowed it down." Now he's 4. So that was a nice opportunity to teach him the power of God, the power of the ocean, and the limits of man. But our leaders still are that arrogant enough to believe that they are that all-powerful and knowing. with everything. Give an example. India, whatever, a couple months ago, massive outbreak of the Delta variant. It used to be called the Indian variant, but we don't want to be racist anymore. The Delta variant, huge climb of cases. And then, as you see from this graph here, plummets. Well, what happened? Seriously, what happened? There was a spike in the upper Midwest and Canada back in March and April. And everyone, all the elites were worried that this was going to spread to the rest of America from the Midwest, but it didn't. Major parts of Africa and Asia still haven't had any outbreaks like we've had here. What about homeless people in America, right? I thought there'd be dead bodies all in the street from homeless people. It's not. And why? How? What's going on? Why did India spike and then go? Michael Osterholm of University of Minnesota, who I first saw on Joe Rogan on March 10th, 2020. He was one of the first people to get me to panic about COVID in the first place. So I never thought I'd ever quote him again, but he had one good line just the other day. He said, "We've ascribed far too much human authority over the virus." Too much human authority, human power, human know-it-all. This is David Lionheart, New York Times. He said, "Over the course of this pandemic, I found one of my early assumptions especially hard to shake, and it's one that many people seem to share. That is that a virus always keeps spreading, infecting almost the entire population until human beings take action to stop it." And this idea does have crucial aspects of truth. Social distancing, especially vaccination, could save lives. But much of the ebb and flow of a pandemic cannot be explained by changes in human behavior. That was true with influenza a century ago. And it's true with COVID now. An outbreak often fizzles mysteriously, like a forest fire that fails to jump from one patch of trees to another. Osterholm said that he's an epidemiologist from Minnesota. He said these surges have little to do with what humans do. He said only recently with the vaccines have we begun to have a real impact on the virus. We're not in nearly as much control as we think we are. We're not in nearly as much control as we think we are. And I think part of our unprecedented panic to this virus is because of our unprecedented overconfidence in ourselves, right? And in mankind. I can control this. I can stop this. We can save the planet from global warming with my actions, and I can stop this virus. And I'm going to control everyone else too and make them do what I think is best. Just like my son standing on top of the wave saying, "Stop." There's people in America who are arrogant enough to think that they can do that with a virus, which is why a dose of humility is so important from our leaders, and I've yet to see a drop of it. Eventually, the virus is going to go away. The COVID's going to turn into the common cold. There's 4 other coronaviruses that make up 25% of common cold cases in America. COVID eventually is going to be the 5th common cold. The virus will go away. The intellectuals won't. David Marcus coming up next to talk about Cuomo, the accusations against him. True story. Mike Slater, spread the word.
Back in March, you said that if the investigation confirmed the allegations against Governor Cuomo, then he should resign. So will you now call on him to resign, given the investigator said the 11 women were credible?
I stand by that statement.
Are you now calling on him to resign?
Yes.
Yeah, that's something. He won't. But that's something. Been a big fan of our next guest for a long time now. Really excited to talk to him about this. David Marcus, he's the political reporter at the New York Post. His book is called Charade, The COVID Lies That Crushed a Nation, many of them coming from Cuomo himself. David Marcus, how are you, David?
Doing well, thanks.
I'm glad you're here. Give us just a quick 30-second run through of what the accusations against the governor of New York are.
So they run a bit of a gamut. Some of them are as serious as sort of like groping or unwanted touching. Some of them are just sort of like inappropriate language that he used with staff. My favorite quote was, I think he told somebody, a female staffer, that he wanted to ride into the mountains on his motorcycle with a woman. So very, very romantic stuff. But it's a lot, right? Like, this isn't a situation where we have, one solid accusation that he's trying to deal with. This is 11 different women, all alleging a range of inappropriate, potentially illegal activities. And that's why I think it's more than most Democrats are able to accept, and that's why you're seeing so many calls for his resignation now.
Okay. Do you think he will resign?
No. I mean, I could be wrong, but I don't think that he will. I mean, I think when you look at recent history, he's got some good examples like Northam in Virginia, where if you hold on, if you let the news cycle work its course, then you have a chance at hanging on to power. And I don't see any reason why he wouldn't do that.
No. I didn't hear the press conference he gave the other day, or the speech, whatever. I did hear a clip of his apology, and I'll never do it again. But did he do something about how we're going to have new guidelines in the state about reporting sexual misconduct or something like that?
Yeah, and I mean, frankly, there already were, right? I mean, he basically signed the laws that he violated, So I don't know. It's not an easy task. He tried a lot of approaches. He blamed it on being Italian at one point. Like Italians are touchy-feely people or something. He had that montage of himself and other people sort of giving hugs in political contexts. There's not a lot of good defenses. Look, his best defense is time. It'll take several months for an impeachment effort to happen. And political events are like planets. They have gravity. And the farther you get away from the event itself, the less gravity it has. And I think that's his only hope here.
One of the pictures in his defense was him hugging his mom, which I think which wasn't a super compelling piece of evidence. Give us a little context, you're in New York, of just the obsession with Cuomo during COVID. Just like, his press conferences, winning an Emmy, book deals, just this infatuation, maybe even more so than Fauci himself. How did it look from the inside?
I mean, that's the way it looked, right? There's a chapter in my book that's called something along the lines of the myth of the great leadership of Andrew Cuomo. And right off the bat, what happened was the media turned him into sort of the anti-Trump, owing actually more to his tone than to his policies, because there weren't actually all that many ways that Cuomo and Trump diverged policy-wise. But the tone was sort of the big deal. And then, we found out about the nursing home scandal, and that's taken over a year now for people to really start to come to terms with. And I think there is a fear among some people, and I heard this from Congresswoman Nicole Malliotakis just yesterday. There is a fear that this is going to overshadow what happened with the nursing homes, that he'll be ushered out of office with a scandal involving these sexual harassment charges, and everyone will just forget about the nursing homes. So that's something that not just Republicans, that people concerned about that situation are worried about.
Can you take a minute or so to describe what happened with those nursing homes? I want to make sure everyone's very honed up on that.
Yeah, so I mean, it's still a little unclear, although Letitia James, the same attorney general who released the report about sexual harassment, did release a report regarding the nursing homes where it showed that it was Cuomo's office that ordered COVID positive patients into nursing homes, which apparently led to in excess of 10,000 deaths. And, there's also evidence that he slow-walked that information to the Department of Justice. The Department of Justice, just I believe last week, said that they are not going to launch an investigation into this and into a couple other states where this happened. But yeah, that's the crux of the story, is that he ordered nursing homes to accept these COVID positive patients with really deadly and disastrous results.
It was very early on in the whole thing. What was the reason? Why did he? There had to be some justification for that early.
I think it had to do with hospital capacity. I think, again, it's still all pretty opaque. Like a lot of things, I don't know that the cover-up's worse than the crime here. I mean, not that it's necessarily a crime, but the action itself was really bad. But then his constant denials, and it's not just him. Governor Whitmer in Michigan had this as well. Just these constant denials and gaslighting of people who lost relatives just sort of added on to the frustration that a lot of people feel with him.
What do you make of, we played the clip in the first segment, Blasio's key to the city? What's the future for vaccine passports in New York City and across the country as you see it?
I think you're going to get a lot of pushback from restaurateurs and gym owners. And it does strike me that this is just another example of restaurant owners being asked to do the government's job for them. It's like, if you want to mandate that everybody has to get a vaccine, mandate that everyone has to get a vaccine, and you can use the power of the state to enforce that. Instead, it appears what's going to happen is that the city is going to use its power to force the restaurant owners to be the enforcers. And I interviewed a lot of restaurant owners over the course of the pandemic, and that's something that they find deeply frustrating because they don't understand why that's their job.
Great point. Are they going to do it, or do you think there'll be enough pushback and this won't ever take off the ground?
I think it depends what that enforcement element looks like. We saw in New York a lot of businesses that really weren't enforcing mask mandates early on, and then an uptick in the number of fines that the city was giving. And then you saw those businesses really trying to crack down. My bodega got a $900 fine at one point. So I think it'll depend on the enforcement mechanism, and a lot of this is still very unclear. We don't have a whole lot of details about it.
And then last question about New York City is lockdowns again. Do you see that happening again?
I don't think so. I don't think that the science was ever really behind it, at least not more, for more than a week or two. But science isn't behind it. People don't want it. The city's starting to try to crawl back to life. So I would be very surprised. Is it possible that schools might get shut down? That I think is still a possibility. But the kind of lockdowns that we saw in 2020, I very, very much doubt it.
Yeah. Well, the science never justifies it, but that hasn't stopped them in a year and a half. So we'll see if it does now. David Marcus, political reporter, New York Post, the book Charade, The COVID Lies That Crushed a Nation. Thanks, David. Good to talk to you, brother.
Thanks for having me.
Keep up the great work. So one thing we didn't get to, and we can maybe do this another day if we talk about this again, the Cuomo name. I used to live in New York. I grew up in New York. Mario Cuomo, his dad. Oh, the hero. So there's something to be said about political dynasties, political families in America that you can't touch. Don't touch them. And this is true in local communities as well. There's the political family that can do anything, and it goes on for decades, and then the whole thing ultimately comes crumbling down. Can we get those things to crumble sooner or never exist in the first place? How about that? True story. Mike Slater, spread the word.
Other countries have found a lot of success in requiring vaccines in public places. New York City just announced today that they'll require vaccines for restaurants and gyms. Do you think more cities and states should institute rules like that?
I do.
Of course he does. Talking about vaccine passports, touched a little bit on it with our last segment, but it's not just going to be in New York City. I can guarantee you that, because that's not what totalitarians do. Barry Farah's here, host of the Barry Farah Show. Barry, how are you, sir?
Doing great. Thanks for having me on, Mike. Great to be with you.
Good to talk to you. What do you make of the future? If we look into our crystal ball, what do you make of the future of this vaccine passport idea here in America?
Well, if you get a vaccine passport, having previously owned a big data company, let me just tell you what you could do. You could when you've got this mandated, digitized, fraud-proof passport, you could have control of all the data and the movement that's material for everybody. I mean, the social credit score would be easy to put in place. You could have a central digital coin that could be next. Let's say inflation and all this debt and all these unfunded liabilities turn into a crash. You could have food rationing from this vaccine passport. You could have fuel rationing, travel restrictions. So the potential of the loss of freedom as a consequence of a vaccine passport is horrendous.
The argument that you and I are making is it doesn't stop with a COVID vaccine on this passport.
I don't think so. I mean, if you look at what employers are doing, they have a right to create their own culture, but they can't discriminate against people in doing that. And they do have to make reasonable accommodations, but that's not where they're ending. I mean, the potential for where the vaccine passport goes is really frightening. I mean, it was never the concept for the public health officials to have this much power.
How do I word this? Why? So you and I see it, right? We're like, oh, this is setting a really bad precedent.
Right.
Most people don't see it. They don't care. They don't see it. What is it? Is it just naivete? Is it? What else is happening? Or what's the difference between you and me, who are like, whoa, this can be used for really bad things, versus the person who's like, sure, sign me up.
Well, if you just look at the media display, so they have things that they can be very proud of. You've got 4 billion vaccination shots. That includes those that have gotten 2 shots around the world, which is kind of huge. We've got 180 million in the United States. We're at 80% vaccinated for those over 65. 80%. Amazing. I mean, really, we should say game over. We should say right now we could be done, because that's the vulnerable. But I think what's happened is people have just elevated the concept of the government being able to give you your health and take care of you in terms of safety issues. And that's really at the expense of freedom. And I think that most people would rather be comfortable than free if freedom costs you something. That's what I think is going on. Otherwise, why wouldn't they openly discuss therapeutics? I mean, why doesn't the medical community openly discuss therapeutics? I've got a 65-year-old friend who was not in the best of health, a little overweight. He had a 3-day COVID problem and was fully recovered by using one of the therapeutics. Why aren't they openly discussing natural immunity? Why don't they openly discuss the health risks and let us make our own decisions? And I think what's happening is people are just favoring the concept of the public health department taking care of everything for us so we can just be comfortable. I think that's the issue.
I think that's right. Let me do a little devil's advocate. Oh, sure. Barry Slater, you guys are overreacting. We already have driver's licenses. We already have Social Security cards. We already have passports. So what's one more thing here? What's the difference between this and everything else?
Well, see, to me, the big difference here is the choice and who it is that we're giving so much authority to. So this restricts your freedom of movement. This restricts your freedom of choice over your own body. It restricts your freedom of privacy over your own health decisions. For goodness sakes, why are we telling our employers about our health decisions? It restricts your freedom from government intrusion into your own health information. It's just over the top. That's different than just having a driver's license that says you have the ability to drive on this tax-funded, paid-for road. And that's different than having a voter identification, which says that it's okay for you to go ahead and vote. Those are different identifications that are applicable to the issue. This goes way above and beyond keeping people safe. The public health department should not have this much control and authority.
That's a really good answer to that. Barry Farah, host of the Barry Farah Show. He ran for governor in Colorado. I hope he does again. Thanks, Barry. Appreciate your time.
Hey, thanks. Thanks for having me on. Great to chat with you.
You too. Also, the CDC, today they extended the eviction moratorium as if the CDC is its own branch of government. And Biden knows Congress didn't do it. Biden said he couldn't do it. And he knows he's literally said the CDC can't do it, but it's unconstitutional, but we're going to do it anyway because it's going to take a while for it to go through the courts. How many branches of government do we have now? True story. Mike Slater, do it tomorrow. Spread the word.